All right, well, good evening, everybody. It's nice to have such a full crowd on a cold and snowy February evening. Welcome to DIA's Readings in Contemporary Poetry series. My name is Megan Whitco, and I'm an assistant curator here at DIA. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's reading, which is the first of our spring season. As many of you know, we have a really exciting lineup for the rest of the spring. We have Joe Elliott and Sarah Jane Stoner reading on March 8th, as well as C.A. Conrad and Cecilia Vicuña on April 5th. And the final May reading of the season will be Keith and Rosemary Waldrop on May 10th. So I'm very pleased to welcome our two poets here for this night's program. We have Kostas Anagnopoulos and Charles North. Thank you both for generously agreeing to be here tonight and to be a part of this series, which is now in its sixth season, which is exciting. I also want to extend a heartfelt thank you to Dominique Levy Gallery, who provides major support for readings in contemporary poetry. Additional support is provided by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, as well as our media sponsor, the Brooklyn Rail. We also want to thank Brooklyn Brewery, who provides the complimentary cold beverages this evening. And lastly, I want to thank DIA's staff who help assist in the coordination of this series, particularly Francesca, Max, Maria, Mary Catherine, as well as our public program staff. So just a quick schedule for the evening. So following the first reader, we're going to take a brief 10-minute intermission, and then we'll resume with the second reader of the evening. We will have titles by both poets available up front during intermission as well as afterwards. And if possible, cash is preferred, but we'll take either. And it's now my great pleasure to give a warm welcome to Vincent Katz, who's going to be introducing the first poet for this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan, and thank you all for coming tonight, braving the not-so-cold weather. As Megan outlined, I think we have a really exciting spring coming up, so I encourage you to go to the website and check it out. It's going to be a pretty varied season, and some people I'm really excited about reading this time, including tonight's readers. And so first up is Kostas Anagnopoulos, and then he'll be followed by Charles North. Kostas Anagnopoulos was born and raised on the west side of Chicago. His mother was a seamstress, and his father was the editor of a Greek-American leftist newspaper. Anagnopoulos is the founder and editor of Insurance Editions. He's published 6 chapbooks, including Irritant, Various Sex Acts, Some of My Reasons, and Night Loop, and a full-length collection titled Moving Blanket, published by Ugly Duckling Press in 2010. And he has a new chapbook, What Works. Is that out already? It's available, What Works. And that's his latest publication. He lives in Jackson Heights, New York, with his husband and daughter. Kostas Anagnopoulos' poems seem like trains of thought. They might be interior dialogues. They certainly don't feel like bits of overheard dialogue or scraps from daily life, the tried and true matter of many an earnest scrivener. Kostas is able to reel it out, which I appreciate, as that is not easy to do, connect one line to the next. An excellent interlocutor, no doubt. And he seems to favor life, if there is a choice, which I also appreciate. For example, he writes, "That's poetry for you. Put it away now and listen to me. I've taken care of everything. We won't dwell on the future. It's misleading, plain wrong, and there's more where that will come from." I like Kostas best when he limits himself to a more restricted framework than the multi-section poem allows. Some of his poems are humorous, Some are mysterious. Some are humorous and mysterious. Most of all, they give the impression of an actual person, but one you can't quite pin down. That impression of actuality is heightened by the dedications some of his poems receive. One wonders who these lucky people are, what marvelous things they did to deserve being the dedicatees of such marvelous poems. The poems themselves certainly won't tell us. There's a feeling of secret knowledge in them, too. For the rest of us, we just get words like, "We must be here for a reason other than money. No embellishment, no ornamentation. Here for everyone and no one. All and nothing. My title is Mr. or something because there are no other options. We must have emptiness. And we, because we love poetry's sublunary mystery, must have Kostas Anagnopoulos. Please help me welcome him to Dia.
That was very kind, Vincent. It's obviously an honor to read here, but especially an honor to read with Charles North, who I consider a magician. I'm going to start with a new poem. Steps. When I was a boy, the sidewalk stood for a man. That was a bad dream. The cement man was bigger than any man on TV. He moved slowly to classical music I have yet to place. When he reached for me, I woke up. Places in life look the same but feel different. The only thing that's really different is the ocean. Let's take where I am now, for instance. The fog is gone. I'll write Dewey about possible rain in a new letter. He's studying horses in Utah and could use a letter. Who knew the bank had a flowering plum tree? I picked a plum. Feet move too fast for words. Words are all over them. Am I too slow or clouded by what's right in front of me, focusing on the ground? A shoe? Outside my window in Queens, a different man measures wet cement on a trowel, calculating with feeling what it takes to repair an entire surface of a building. I'm going to thank him since we're on the subject of dreams. I step over the cracks, avoiding whole paragraphs of my life. I keep looking for a cash machine. If someone would kindly count my steps, perhaps I could look up. Roots push up under my feet without permission. I follow you for a while without notice. Permission granted, you said. Erie, Pennsylvania, Neenah, Wisconsin, all rusted. A whole new alphabet under our noses. Whose footprints are these? Whose feet? Not ours. Someone poured cement, one square at a time. In Greece, I've seen them frame this kind of thing with string and wood. Romans were at another mixer. And there's no graceful way to drink water when you're up here. Start here. After this, I'm putting the instructions to bed. Here's a memory for you. Walking out on yourself. No regrets. Those come later. No Big Bang Theory, but a flyer in the lobby, cloudy later in the day. I listened to the speaker. His elocution blushed with anonymity. I liked the way it was written before I heard it. Walk off the page. I could eat the words or eavesdrop. I don't speak of flowers anymore. That was young Kostas. Begone, flowers. I'd like a dairy farm for my future self. Bookmark it. And with that, I startled a poem into being, telling me what it wanted, what it didn't want. But eventually communication crumbled. Imagine speaking only with words, words plunged into boiling water. I overwrite. I am tense and autocratic. I said I'm sorry, moving down Northern Boulevard, an extension of Old Jackson Avenue, the land of dealerships, farmland once. I saw the quotas of salespeople pinned up in their cubicles. I feel for them. It makes sense for a second, then it's gone. That poem stood me up again. What are you driving at? I don't drive. I'm walking to work. I remember once I took a personal day fucking William Saratellis Shakespeare. I leaned on his words in time of need. Another memory, sage from the island of Pathos, milk thistle, in the middle of pollutants, saddened by the broken limb of the locust tree, so brittle, an orange cone protects it, waiting for the mulcher. I was between stations, listening to my brain for hours on end. Why not walk away from it, cut through the garden, looking for a place to pee? Fantasy in the other hemisphere, same difference. Spare me the lecture, brain is so lame. I go down the same street. I'm from Chicago, land of the nobodies, South Side blues. I ate Swedish meatballs, thoughtfully. What would they do to me? What effect? Poem, I'm fond of you, but I must go. Tip my hat, return to my cubicle. All is aligned with the present moment. I have a pet moth. What a joke. I feed it cashmere. Keep walking. Why don't you learn how to drive? Turn the corner before something clocks you. The first time you ran into a door, less than 10,364, your fist went through glass. No real cut, just some blood. That was the practice round. Doctors are familiar with your bones. Come and go as you wish. Transfer, if you like, to the Q66. I'll make it easy for you. Press play. Your family and friends are gone now. Open your eyes. It takes a whole day to warm up to life. At least that's what you think. And that was a poem for Bill Reed, who is this gentleman that I see in hospice. Elizabeth Bishop. This is for the amazing Carol Samatovich. I can't control my appetite. As a boy, I finished everything on my plate. The last bite was the most important one. Today I eat bok choy, tossed in oil, lemon and salt. The more bitter, the better. Bitter melon, what a beauty. Button down on it, what glossy lips. America is doing everything it can to kill me. I stop and remember this is food. I'm not just eating. It needs time to catch on. Bishop is bitter green. In Bishop, I found my adverbs. Just one can last a while, during a storm, or running up against a snail. They mean something for some reason, and can be easily inserted. In 1946, the average print run for a book of poetry was 1,000. Penmanship. Does anybody know what a word that is broken up in syllables but still contain individual words like penmanship is called? Is it a compound word? But is it a prettier name than that? No? Okay. Anyway, penmanship. 3 pencils sharpened, Ticonderoga soft, help for the end of the month. carried away by the memory of the handsome internist in light scrubs while he put pressure on my right leg. I didn't want to break anything in the room, but why this paint job? Click of a distant pantry and the task at hand. Gurgle of drain and water heater. Muffled excitement. If this isn't home, there's always a church to smell. Frankincense. On the side of a mountain is a cave. Easter's coming with its bread, and there will be a new year, test of time, and the smell of erasers, bringing it all back. Each thing finds its place. Light in sections, tidy up, stroke on. The page has the potential to open something. The bread crumbled, ducks gathered. Many adjustments later, it's flattened out for you to see. Prayer. Piety isn't something I'd recommend unless you can break the tedium of it with sneezes in stereophonic sound. The people a few pews away appear to be speaking a foreign language that is English, but with words missing, showing a row of teeth, or counting on their fingers, or moving in the pattern of a bat. You'd like to think their open-ended nature is childlike, that they can't hold off, and you will have changed your mind often, looking for some semblance of a tract, which isn't what you need to read here now. The next poem is Appearance Alone. This is written when I was a fresh dad. Once upon a time is reminiscent of your eyes, appearing in a poem by accident, or in a fairy tale told on a rainy day. I mistook the rain for a description of your sad eyes, and now you must stop using the word once. When you look out the window, something will look back at you, but only once. All is contingent on pointlessness, windswept through the penny arcade, giving the appearance of dead time. The past is not healing as quickly as you'd like. Within is an abstraction of the way out. Logical places exist in illogical books, but reality can't be miniaturized as a mental object or a marker for reflection. No logic needed, dead to the world, blinking light at the end of the tunnel. Don't get rust on your lens, nor does public opinion matter. It's best to have less than others. This has been said before, I know. Propaganda isn't what you think in a thinking poem, which this is not. It's a conversation I'm having with you. The house is empty, fragile as eyes. My life as a baby. I really do remember my first memory being in my mother's womb and coming out and hearing voices, and I was upside down. That's not the poem, but it's my first memory. Here's the last of my advice. After this, you're on your own. I resisted knowledge too, until I caught a dose of death. Then I became a man. I preferred the company of women. My advice to myself was listen. Can you listen? I'm sorry. I can't put a complex sentence together, even though the meaning is simple. My grandmothers crocheted the whole world on a bedspread. It made them blind. My beautiful, blind, illiterate grandmothers. Now they're close to death, speaking gibberish, insults, Greek disappointments. You and I grew up as babies, eating cream of wheat, having our feet washed in warm, soapy water. We did our chores. For example, every Wednesday I wound the clock, dusted, helped with the laundry. I've translated this from the Greek. It comments on other people's wealth, how everyone works for someone they'd like to forget. Now I feel like a dummy, peeling apples. My life is all peels. Why is that? The maintenance of organs. Many of us are born with weak ones. Some people give theirs away. A life of nothing, circles with nothing inside them, nothing outside either, except echoes racing, a gentle water spray, waking up to something overlooked, like light. Poem. My mother's needle put me through school. If my mother were a fruit, she'd be a fig, and I her little blood orange. I am sealed in this fruit world. I don't even have a proper name, nonetheless a routine. My window is a warped one. This has no title, and it's a prose poem. The wind kicks up as I try to keep my balance on this rope bridge. Why all this biography? The birds have no idea where it comes from or why its bricks are laid in that way. Your property, too. I cower behind my sketch pad, having descended for the final sitting. Am I happy? That's just an expression, but seriously, I lost my cufflinks in the storm. But why all the fuss? Over some guy? And to think a Minoan fresco is alive in your face. This is when we part, and I eat my vegetables by gaslight, dressing our masculine salad for the last time. Does that mean we'll be pigeon-toed for life, or use process of elimination to define who's who in bed? But back to the wind situation. See, I was trying to walk up into it, and we kept missing each other. Planes landed, and the birds landed on top of the planes. They seemed to feed each other. Feed each other what? I wiped the corners of my mouth, brushed the crumbs off the bench, try to locate the last of the dying ones, but they're gone. The next one's for Larry Fagan. His cat inspired this poem. Cat poem. If you don't have anything else to write, you can write about me. I have eyes. I let the balloons go, yellow like my eyes and no longer mine. They belong to the wind. Now they are dots. I move along, trying to entertain myself with a crazy quilt and a rabbit shadow. It's all the same in the end. A record turns, shadows do a slow dance, the music stops. For the most part, it was condescending. Poetry and my mother. People are still going hungry while I write this poem, sitting on the beach, watching a gull tear at a clam. I need to learn boundaries. My mother advises me to leave poetry behind. Relax, Kostas. Yeah, ma. She's a seamstress, 6 days a week. She listens to her dreams. One about missing teeth worries her. It means death or danger. She thinks about obligations, how everyone is obligated to someone else, we to each other. She keeps her word. I've seen her eat a goat's eyes out and suck on its brains. She's a small, simple woman, gets happy with a glass of red. She starts dinner in the early morning. I wake and smell the onions and garlic. She mustn't read this. Columbus Day. Which way to the parade? Silence after sirens. The packet of seeds on your desk never made it to Earth. You lose interest in a merger. You read each story in the papers like it was your story. Then they all get shredded, forgotten, ink itself. Paper is already post-consumer. You take a walk, a tragedy stops you. You take in a few words at a time. You can touch the surface, no deeper, but loss can't stop anything. Idiots argue the point. I put out my hand and write on my palm in ink, MILK. Sensations are bunched up, emotions stumble, a horrible mess, a handprint not mine on the wall. I superimpose my hand, it's not a match. Everything closed is open now. I buy a quart of milk and go home. Night Loop. This is for my sister, Casey Blue, and the first line of it was stolen from her. Night Loop. 1. Routine makes the city tiny. You run into this one and that one person, haven't seen you in years. We don't know the others. Avoid calls. Don't whistle. You have friends for that. Music is up front. The piano is the leading lady. Heat enters from the sun, but it could originate in the palm of your hand. Some people are always antagonistic, even in poems, irony's puckish ways. Other people are permanently metal. Being talked to is offered here as well. You make one casual remark and you think that's it, let it go, or this is the end, meaning nothing, distracted by every word, exact meanings. Putting things off isn't good, though once in a while it can save your life. 2. After a night of bad dreams, lost at sea, stop thought, boil water, begin again, remember nothing of what's in that ancient mariner's head. And don't blame your mother. She's an independent operator. You broke away from her at age 1 month. That's what you tell yourself, but she keeps careening back. The sky is paper today. They keep calling you for something. They don't care what. Deprive yourself 1 sense at a time. Nothing's coming in if nothing's going out. Story of your life. Gone is complexity. I didn't mean to cut you off. What are you doing right now? Try this imported orange drink. This is for, the next poem is for Kelly Adams. I don't know if anyone has ever experienced a tree being cut down in front of their house, but we experienced that recently. And the first 3 words are from Olympia, my daughter. This wasn't a recent poem, but it makes sense. Tree. Tree, stump, nothing. Years in the making, if only to write the short, insignificant list for no one. Tree and stump, once one thing. As you know, my father's leg was amputated in a different poem. Snow was the main character, imaginary people off to the side, covered in snow. A hole is dug in time. It's a day later. The holes blend in, remnants of last night's play, between equidistant walls, varieties. Trees need no introduction. Everyone knows sap when it flows. Spools, small boxes, novelties. Description is as description does. Half moons on paper, teeth marks in the margins. Before leaves open up and out, the flower is a droopy catkin. Hunger. I kept track of myself. I made a graph. I'm seeing Dr. Kayada today. Love hurts. We melted in the water. There was nowhere to go. Who were the Greek mystics? E.R. Dodds is our main man. My grandmother beat me with a switch from a rose bush. She locked me in the cellar for a few hours. How mystical is that? The neighbors tied me to a tree, I kid you not. But it didn't make me a man. I did that on my own, though I'm not a tough guy. I believe all the sound bites. The cellar was right under the porch. Jesse lived on the same street then. He jumped in the YMCA pool with all his winter clothes on. The lifeguard ignored him. This story has made me very hungry. Bernadette says almost anything is edible. And the last poem is this. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. The holes in my education. I am graded and come up short. How free the birds are. They walk too. I follow them, but they are fast. The books are small and short, but slow. I study the night sky and its holes, but you travel with a black nimbus lighting your way. Thunder interrupts our class, leaving us dyspeptic, squabbling over nothing. We see stars without being struck. Teacher pushes our buttons. Our limbs fatten with regret. We are, after all, in a land where books are left out in the rain. I'm in the lowest percentile, having horsed around like a musical top or a page torn out. Will the future reach me before I die? Thank you.
Charles North is the author of 15 books of poems and prose, including The Year of the Olive Oil, The Nearness of the Way You Look Tonight, Cadenza, Complete Lineups, and What It Is Like, New and Selected Poems, published by Turtle Point Press and Hanging Loose Press in 2011. With James Schuyler, North edited Broadway, a Poets and Painters anthology, and Broadway 2. North has been poet in residence at Pace University, New York, since 1997. He lives and works in New York City. Charles North is one of the most delightfully erudite poets you will come across. Paradoxically, though, his language and frames of reference are eminently accessible. What makes his poetry particular and stirring is his elegant play with the English language itself. That, above all, is the overriding subject of his work. One of North's early poems is titled, A Few Facts About Me, but it would be a rash reader or listener who would take the words that follow at face value. Quote, I am moved often and easily without knowing why or finding it appropriate to be a consequence of somebody else's unfathomable will, end of quote. That there is also a romantic strain in North's poetry is not at odds with his more conceptual bent. On the contrary, this strain exists in sympathy with, or because of, one is tempted to say, the bravado of the poet's handling of syntax, the bold paths he cuts and lanes he manicures, in the gardens of his poetic making. North is obsessive about words, how they are used, and we are the beneficiaries. In his poem, I, Reflecting the Gold of Fall, he writes, some words, like fuck, require objects some of the time. Others are content to be themselves, suspended like a chair, covered in green ink. His most recent poems, some of which he may be reading tonight, show North's facility reaching ever more dazzling speeds. The poetry is too much with us, he writes, then counters it with, you can't say that, but we can. It is, which is why we are so excited to welcome Charles North to DIA. Please welcome him.
Thanks very much, Vincent. That's extremely generous. I'm very happy to be reading at DIA. I've heard some of my favorite poets read here. And as I'm not saying anything that some of you don't know, but when DIA was downtown on Mercer Street, it was also the scene of the most memorable reading I have ever been to in my life, which I think is the case with a number of people here, was Jimmy Schuyler's first ever reading in 1988, which, by the way, has been posted on YouTube. I don't know whether with Dia's blessing or not, but you can find it, and it's a must-see. Okay, I'm going to read for something like 20 minutes, I think. And I thought, since it is Dia, it might be appropriate to start with a couple of sort of painterly poems and then go into newer things. So a couple of tiny things to start with that have something to do with art. This is called Study, and it's, pardon the expression, a triolet. Study. It must be daylight. Your painting of chicory dividing a dark green field fills on all sides with light. It must be daylight. Some of the portions which are out of sight become what the painting yields. It must be daylight, your painting of chicory dividing a dark green field. And the other sort of painterly poem, actually I'm going to read 3 tiny prose poems from a set called Pictures from Bruegel, which William Carlos Williams did first, but I spelled Bruegel differently. The first is called Rodeo. Guy, really a pink shirt and the flat top of a round brown cap, brings down hog with the help of a hunting knife, then replaces knife in holster slit on hog's underside. And the second, which is the title of this book, is What It Is Like. This is a well-known painting. 2 pensive monkeys chained heartbreakingly to a metal ring in a high, thick-walled window arch, no glazing, which looks out behind on a pale harbor and filmy blue and green city in the far distance. Clearly, the monkeys are conscious, have consciousness. We know what it is like for them to have given up hope and to look only inward, while appearing to stare at the ring imprisoning them and the space just below the window in front, between it and us. Okay, these are all quite new. And in fact, I'm going to read a couple of parts of a longish poem that's in progress, something that until this year I never ever had the courage to do. So I hope it works. Anyway, not quite yet, though. I'm going to read one thing first, build up courage. This is called Replies to Paul, Limitedness. Life is clearly a gift, like the ballpoint pen from TSL, Time and Space Limited in Hudson, New York, info@timeandspace.org, rather than from the TLS, which ups the subscription rate every time you renew. But given that the pen is at least 10 years old, the email could well have changed along with the other info printed on it, like the air I stepped into not 5 minutes ago, a thick cloud of absence. If, as I think, life is more a family of resemblances than a notion bounded by what it includes and excludes, it comprises a lot of under-over that exceeds any reasonable notion of limitedness relevant to either time or space. So the important events, some of them pretty clearly embarrassed to be taking part, hence the gusts, rumblings, sun showers, etc., occur above and below any reasonable notion of ground. So say the faceless clouds over the woods, one red almost to the point of violet, another rapidly losing traction close to the cable tower, barely in silhouette. Okay, again, this is a poem in progress, and this is the first section. It's called Everything, and it has an epigraph from the great cartoonist George Harriman, who created Crazy Cat years and years ago. The epigraph is, everything is just nothing repeating itself. And that actually appears later on. 1, stop me if you've heard this one. Two llamas poke their heads out of the small stone enclosure, part of a garage, they spend their time in, when they're not taking the sun in a tiny fenced-in yard dotted with wildflowers. Just as we turned to look, a small flock of wild turkeys materialized out of nothing and began squawking, clearly at us. Who knew they were the concierge family? Everything gusts and then dies back down. At least as likely, everything exists inside a giant thought balloon which rides continual gusts, although no one can possibly speak about, let alone contemplate, the situation. As to the air outside the balloon, spangled with oak leaves and high strips of white cloud, let's leave that one for now. As the beaver said to the log, half in, half out of water, getting to gnaw you, getting to know all about you. Speaking of balloons, the image I've always liked from as far back as high school is the lead one, successful as a lead balloon. It took off like a lead balloon. The fact that it got off the ground at all, before plummeting with a thud if not a loud crash, does a good job of encapsulating human striving wedded to human failure. Not certainly that the conjunction is inevitably the case, but the poignancy, to me anyway, is palpable. As to the light from outside that must penetrate the thought balloon, regardless of its color or degree of translucence, that too seems best for later, like playing 2 sets of tennis following a bout of pneumonia, or the view of Niagara that nobody has. What did the 20-ounce bottle of Perrier say to the late afternoon sunlight, struggling to get indoors? The apartment building has more openings than the sprawling cemetery on the way to the dump in Hudson, New York, or the one littering the heavily trafficked Manhattan approach to the Robert F. Kennedy, formerly Triborough Bridge. You'd think the fumes by themselves would be a discourager. You say tomato, and I say everything is consumed by its appearances. I've been instructed to push a handful of minor characters back into the wings, but they won't go, no matter how hard I try. The pencil line between being and not being, hardly static however it looks, more accurately between staying put and erupting into feelings that can't be held in check no matter what, like the corruption built into medical advertising aimed directly at the TV viewing public, reminds me of the boundary line between so-called feeling and so-called understanding. To have a purchase on, know thoroughly by close contact with or long experience of, as opposed to hearsay or even legitimate authority. As the great poet Mayakovsky sidestepped at least some of the more sinister aspects of futurism, only to fall victim to himself as well as comrades who didn't mean nearly as well as they should have, so time fights off just about every conjunction, those with palpable connections to space, as well as just about any others you can name. There goes one now. No, it's a bird batting by. In fact, the sky, as Wallace Stevens remarked of the world just prior to the onset of World War II, in contrast to T.S. Eliot, whom Stevens somewhat surprisingly singles out for praise, is growing floppier. Warped tent poles and stakes, an occasional scrawny pigeon on the wing, one roof garden with a flapping umbrella which, from the back, looks like Our Lady of the George Washington Bridge, but no cloud structure for support, unless you count the grayish wisps, barely clouds, that hung around the Palisades for most of the morning. Actually, the view is appealing, provided it doesn't decide to go too far in the direction of floppiness and risk falling over into the appearance of whatever's holding it up. A girder or pylon or some idea of structure per se that hasn't yet been instantiated. Speaking of support, I've had a hard time forgetting about the guy in our building who I used to see going for his run every morning before breakfast, who jumped from his 10th floor window and magically survived, seriously broken bones but alive, apparently because he landed in a tiny courtyard on a bale of recycled newspapers, primarily the New York Times. Does that qualify as the ethical sphere? Maybe just? Yesterday morning, just before I woke up, a few persons with backpacks and what looked like metal maps several inches thick were bobbing up and down on platforms that looked like ice floes, but more cork than ice. Every once in a while, one of them went over with a silent splash. Suicide is one of the silent E words, but so are cope and rosette, inchoate, baseline, nape. Here's one. How many singularities can fit onto the head of a pin pushed into the so-called bulletin board of consciousness? Cork again, but not a real theme, I'm pretty sure. As distinct from the riptides, sinkholes, tsunamis, you name it, occasionally just a tone rower cluster, that emerge, seemingly out of nothing, to manhandle the attention principle and hold on for what can seem, and in some cases be, hours or even days. So how best to use one's time, which in one very large sense is everything, is at best a conundrum worth examining, and at worst the exam and the dream, with all the silent percussion, in the course you've never signed up for, although everyone else is scribbling away at their desks next to their green lamps, the lagniappe being, somewhat on the order of dusk, an apparently new range of colors, intonations, shapes, etc., which is familiar and also entirely out of the blue. Okay, one more section from this poem. And I don't need to say this. Kostas read a very nice poem titled Elizabeth Bishop. She's one of my favorite poets. 2. As I was saying, the art of schmoozing isn't hard to master. I wasn't saying that, you were. Well, stop anyway. 2 beefsteak tomatoes go out for a walk just before sunset, avoiding anything with sharp edges. Shadows of pre-war cornices and peeling iron gates on the pavement, grates, high heels, stop signs, the shark kite stuck between maple branches. Blood-red thoughts, which don't include, although they hint at, certain of the silent E words I began to mention earlier, suffused if not with blood, then with a coursing nostalgia for beginnings, sometimes unbearably so. Orange, absence, muse, landscape, still life. Ductile, imbibe, force, nerve, musculature. Compared to which cliches teem with life, like the blood-red peppers that stretch a Melendez landscape come still life to the bursting point. The fact that a single letter appears more often than any other in the current alphabet doesn't mean its position is always the most enviable. Any more than black A, white E, red I, etc. are written in stone, Rimbaud notwithstanding. In fact, in the version I prefer, every one of those backwards-looking, forlorn-seeming final E's was wrenched from its quarry of pink granite, as from the age of 5 and probably before, the urn-like U has been firmly cemented in the yellow-orange range, if not so dark or coarse-grained, painterly is the word, as the orangey hawk that used to land on our bedroom air conditioner 3 or 4 times a year, whether to gather its energy or look down onto the street for a meal or just decide on the next leg of the trip. What is it like to be a hawk? What would it be like to see things too clearly, from above as well as below? I hope the following isn't depressing, but the more I entertain it, the more I like the image of a coffin with a skylight, as Michel Leiris described the lid Raymond Roussel had made for his mother, presumably so he could have glimpses of her even after the coffin was nailed shut. Death, thou shalt die. Or at the very least, be an open and not eternally shut case. A lot more poignant and human, it seems to me, than desperate. What it is like to be something rather than nothing. George Harriman, everything is just nothing repeating itself. I know that's Crazy Cat. Actually, it's the inspiration of Bum Bill B., a dour but oddly engaging resident of Harriman's Coconino County, Arizona. But the point, I hope, is that the substitution of daylight for dark, everyday experience for the mystery that threatens to bury it out of time and out of mind, the nothing that is worth acres of literary illusions. Speaking of mysteries, the literary kind and not merely the ultimate one, it occurred to me recently that trying to write one may be a way of separating what is important from what certainly isn't. What the detective chief inspector had for breakfast along with his espresso in Paris, where most of the action takes place, the color of his worn trench coat and the sky lowering over the centuries-old buildings, alongside the deadly game being played out over fictional time, which is organized into chapters that are both artificial and gripping segments of real life, and whose very artificiality the reader perceives as a way of not only providing a convenient framework for the reading experience, but in addition, on some level, hints about facing actual situations that might prove overwhelming, e.g., the awareness that a penultimate chapter may embrace the future as well as the present and thereby mediate otherwise untenable shocks to the system. Other examples along the same lines, domesticating at least to some degree what is profoundly other. The notion of an underworld, quaint as that is, people dropping like flies, a headless figure in a black cloak carrying a tool used for harvesting, the image of a coffin open to sunlight, if not fresh air. I certainly don't want to suggest that genuine mysteries have no elements which linger in the air or on the grass like dew or bullet casings. Not to speak of shreds of last night's dream, which unsurprisingly was mostly about you. My position was unclear. The trouble with mornings is that they come when you're not awake. Archie Goodwin. Sometimes. Rarely is anything either everything or nothing, just as it's never Archie Goodwin without Nero Wolfe, and rarely without the wonderful, mysterious Saul Panzer as well, or Scylla without Charybdis, or Anagnopoulos, or fate accompli, but not both. I hasten to add that if you have anything to say about any of this, which might be of interest to others and not just yourself or your in-group, by all means say it. But please remember to raise a hand and wait to be recognized. Others may be as eager to speak or object as you are, and the time, as always, is limited. Okay. Thanks. I appreciate that. I really do. And again, it's not probably in its final form, but we shall see. Okay. This is called Names in November. It's a short one. Names in November. And it's dedicated to a friend, a poet, philosopher friend named John Cady. 1. Sturdy but pale like an upcoming memorial. Fifth Avenue gets dragged downtown, and the nominalists enjoy the ride the same way the actual names do. No profile in peril, only occasionally the confusing view above the Harlem and East Rivers, lurching but undeniably smitten. The barest hint of green moves a taxi with a sliding door to the curb, from which the great pianist Alfred Cortot steps into the crosswalk, head bent so nothing is on film or awkward with strangers. 2. Christopher Wren, Butterfly McQueen, Robin Roberts, Angel Cordero, where are you when we need you? The dream sends out for a street. Not enough. At least names give it a shape. The poetry is too much with us. You can't say that. Knobby certainty, reticent about its affect, which includes endless sputtering from the bridge traffic below. Take the noble gases, the creamy Alfa Romeo barely grazed by evening. Prey to rugged individualism like the Hermes typewriters. I have 2 more. This is a prose poem. It's called Pain Quotient, and it's dedicated to David Watson. Who is here. 1. How to explain tragedy to a deer. This is the assignment. Well, it isn't the assignment, it's in the general category of things assigned, like growing to a mature height of 4 inches if you happen to be a certain strain of ornamental cactus, or being shamed back to life by any means possible. I like the idea that hope springs eternal, especially as the adjective, not adverb, suggests that spring is a verb of being rather than action. It doesn't have to be imagined or looked forward to or yearned for or original in any sense of the word. The present, which is always with us, regardless. Take the piano music of objects, the black and white, the mystical harmonics, bipolarities, etc. 2. The afternoon smells like rosemary, whereas the morning was on the visual side, jutting among the albums. Someone David knew, an actress, referred to the Café Pain Quotidien as pain quotient, apparently with a straight face. I owe this poem to David, obviously. The daily pain, which I seem to remember my father bringing home from work. Or if you happen to be in show business, the pan. Take the extremist willows. 3. 5:30 p.m. The soul goes out for its walk. Just be sure you're back in time for supper. The colors look pasted on, washy blue, like a robin's egg seen through a landlord's shade, then just washed away. Where's conceptual art when you need it? Everyone knows that Janus Weathercock and Cornelius von Vinkboons are too good not to be true. but very few know of their connection to the poet John Clare, or that they were in fact the same person who not only worked for London Magazine in the early part of the 19th century, but was, according to Clare's biographer Jonathan Bate, the Oscar Wilde of his day. I say metaphors have it easy. Brahms surging, receding, churning the already churned foam of being, whereas Rachmaninoff is like a fist to the heart. 4. Suppose everyone were a lot less talkative, or were prohibited from talking to anyone who spoke the same language. Not only people, but houseplants, raccoons, self-service elevators, winged salesmen from the future, etc. A gem-like solid framed by a ribbon of aluminum light begins in speech but is diverted primarily by all the mistakes from the remembered past. Another episode has a word whirling around its phonemes, which are also whirling. We were talking about shaming someone back into life, the blood verities, hanging in the air like a memory lost, but recapturable if you don't mind the mix of truth and sprawl, fragments of all that can be thought without accompaniment or fixation, or whatness. The starred drawer helps with the street noise. Lines, half-lines, whorls, turquoise, i.e. green mixed with blue, highlights. Characters get dragged in kicking and screaming from the wings and forget their resonant ties to objects. To be calmer than a rug, a particle from the 1940s, dizzying, I'll take it. But you can have the stifling dream states like a perpetual air raid. Why so many notions settling in the middle of the forehead like a tableau vivant? So much more cause than affect. The summer retired early, was forced out actually like the recorder family from mainstream music. Mixed use but heartfelt skyline. And the last one, which was actually, I have to say something. I thought I had put to bed these poems in the form of baseball lineups, which I've written over the years. And I promised myself I would never read another one. But I found one that was not included in complete lineup, and the dedicatee is here, so I'm going to read it. And that's the last thing I'll read. And after this, I won't ever read one again, unless there's a dedicatee in the audience. Okay, it's called. It's a lineup of field positions in batting order of wonderful songs, standards and jazz tunes, and it's called "Tuning Up" for Bill Berkson. Batting first and playing center field, I've got a crush on you. Batting second and playing second base, anything goes. Batting third and playing left field, lush life. Batting cleanup, playing first base, round midnight. Batting fifth and catching, willow tree. Batting sixth and playing third, save the bones for Henry Jones, Henry don't eat no meat. Batting seventh and playing right field, I got lost in his arms. Batting eighth and playing shortstop, button up your overcoat. And my personal favorite, because he was actually a pitcher, and it's also a sensational song by Dave Frischberg, pitching and batting ninth, Van Lingle Mungo. Do you know that? You know who he was? A Dodger, as I think? Nobody knows. Okay, thank you very much.